welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining Olga and I to, discuss a very important and topical issue right now, where we can see sort of the emergence of the ATO coming out. I'm Arthur Thanosopoulos from Earlypay, and we are very keen to sort of assist both from our product line, but more importantly from information line, brokers and people out there with interest to understand a couple of things in terms of what's happening out in the marketplace, but also what solutions could be there. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome all. Olga?
Absolutely, thank you everyone. So what we're hoping to go through today is to give you a little bit of a background on what I do and how TaxAssure helps people, and Arthur's going to do the same on how Earlypay can help people. That's going to be at the beginning of the presentation, and then as we move towards the end of the presentation, we're going to go through a case study in which both TaxAssure and Earlypay work together to help a client really get back on their feet and move through quite a significant financial difficulties to continue being a viable business. So what I'll do first, for those that haven't come across us, I'll go through a bit about what TaxAssure does and how we help people. So our sole aim is to free clients from tax debt, help them get on with running a successful and sustainable business. We're not accountants and we're not a law firm. However, the three owners, we are all commercial lawyers, and we understand exactly what's going on as business owners and also in this particular space. It's very important for us to provide a bespoke service. So it is not cookie cutter in any way, shape or form. Every single client that comes to us, we evaluate their specific situation and what needs to be done to help them in the best possible ways. Some of the ways that we do help them is to negotiate payment plans to get them back into a position of compliance, and we'll go through that a bit more later on. We also look at people that are currently in payment plans, get them back into payment plans that are more affordable. Again, it's all about matching payment plans with cash flow and ensuring they're in a compliant position and that they're able to run their business. The other big thing we do, which I know a lot of people are keen to hear about, is we're able in certain circumstances to reduce the overall debt. Now, that is done by looking at what the interest and penalty components are for many clients and preparing very detailed applications in relation to the remission of the interest and penalties. And again, we will go through that later on in further detail.
And for those who have not had the opportunity to be introduced to Earlypay before, what we do is we're a cash flow finance solution provider across three main product lines. We look at trying to provide a lot of credit. Fundamentally, we do debtor finance, we do asset finance, and we do trade finance. So we utilise the assets in the business itself, the debtors, along with their assets being, it might be motor vehicles or it might be machinery, equipment, etc., in the business, to provide some value and give the businesses working capital. And again, similar to what Olga was saying, we'll talk a bit more in detail in relation to how we piece that together to try and provide a holistic solution, and one which, in particular with today's topic, can also help with their ATO position. So Olga, over to you on the current position of the ATO.
Absolutely. If we just jump to the next slide. So the reports at the moment are there's 53 billion in outstanding ATO debt. Now, prior to COVID, that sat at around 23 billion, and this is considered as reported debt. So it doesn't include people that haven't lodged. So it's a huge figure that's out there at the moment, and the stress and the pressure that is causing businesses and individuals is undescribable. What we are seeing is that the ATO is absolutely back to business as usual. They're back, they've been given directions, the debt team have specific directives that they're to collect debt. So active debt collection has been recommenced by the ATO. Now, there was even a comment in the Senate committee a couple of weeks ago with that direction that it is back to business as usual and the commencement of this debt collection. Now, what that means in reality is we're receiving calls constantly as I'm sure a number of accountants are as well, following up outstanding lodgements and following up outstanding debt. Now, some of these calls are in relation to lodgements and debt that were meant to have happened last month. So it's not just old debt they're chasing, but it's all debt altogether, and as low as $20,000. The other thing we're also seeing is statutory demands being issued, and we'll also go through a bit later, but we're seeing director penalty notices being issued. And accountants and clients are also receiving firmer action and warning letters as well. There's been a lot of commentary around when there will be wind-ups again and when legal action will begin. What we have seen and what we are hearing from the debt officers within the ATO is by the end of this financial year, there will be legal action taken. And with the seeing of statutory demands being issued, that all of that will lead to further legal action being issued by the ATO. The other interesting thing that I will just note here as well is that if a debt was incurred in 2019, it's considered as a pre-COVID debt. So even though all of us understand that COVID massively affected a company's position or an individual's position in repaying that debt, the ATO considers it as pre-COVID, and so there is no special consideration to that COVID debt. The other thing that the ATO have done is they've classified COVID in the same position as they would a natural disaster. So on their website, there's actually a list of natural disasters, and if someone is affected or a natural disaster occurs, like what's just happened with the floods, the ATO record a list of postcodes that are directly affected by that natural disaster. However, there then becomes a positive obligation on the taxpayer to actively contact the ATO and describe to them and put an application forward as to why they're affected and why they should be treated differently. Without any of that positive obligation, if you owe $1 and that dollar or anything more is outstanding, you're now considered to be in a position of non-compliance. I think if we go to the next slide. I'll go through in a bit more detail the director penalty notices. A lot of people, I think, don't understand the seriousness. There are certain circumstances in which a director can be personally liable for a company's debt. Now, one of these circumstances actually snuck in April last year. Some new laws came into place. And what happened around that was that directors can now be personally liable for GST, super, and PAYG debt. So if the company has not paid those debts, the ATO can issue what's called director penalty notices, demanding effectively that the directors pay those debts. So the directors then become personally liable for the company's debt. Now, this is an extremely serious situation, and if nothing is done, then further action will be taken by the ATO against the director. We're already seeing these notices being issued. We're also seeing notices issued to directors of old companies. So companies that have gone through certain events of insolvency, whether it was a DOCA or they had started the liquidation process or the company had been wound up. However, in those situations, the directors were deemed personally liable for a portion of the debt. And I've got 2 clients at the moment that we're dealing with director penalty notices, and they believe the companies had been completely wound up. However, they are still personally liable for a portion of that debt and now need to address that particular debt. The other thing that I should have mentioned at the beginning that I'll just sort of throw in now is that we're not accountants. So we don't do anything to do with the compliance part of it. We don't help lodge your BASs. We don't deal with returns. We just deal with debt. We only deal with the debt side of things and the debt end. Our team are talking to the debt officers all day, every day at the ATO and have a very unique relationship with the ATO to ensure that clients get back into a position of compliance that they can afford and that is sustainable for their business, and thus helping both the ATO recover but ensure people are in a position of compliance, but also ensuring that these arrangements help our clients in a way that they're affordable. The other thing, sorry, I'll just mention quickly off the last slide, is that the ATO also now have the power that if a debt is over $100,000, that they can report you to a credit reporting agency. So the ongoing effect of that is huge because it then affects the credit rating. And as we have a number of discussions, and I'm sure you're all very, very aware, the difficulty in then getting that removed off your record is huge. One of the big things that we're telling lots of people, and I've sort of been banging on about for at least 6-8 months now, is that your ATO debt was deferred, it didn't disappear. So the disappearance of the debt hasn't gone anywhere. So it was deferred for 2 years, which is a long time. We also saw other debts and other pressures that were deferred during that period of time, such as potentially paying landlords or the banks. So I think there's been a bit of a culture about, well, we don't have to worry about the ATO, or we don't have to worry about debt. We'll just wait till they come knocking on our door. They are absolutely back, and it is not the ideal option to just wait. I've also heard people say, oh, well, if I don't lodge, they won't know that I haven't lodged. And if they don't know I haven't lodged, they won't come and chase me for the lodgement, and they also won't come and chase me for the debt. That's completely wrong. There's sort of no other way to put it. They are aware of the outstanding lodgements, and you are still considered to be in a position of non-compliance. If you proactively engage and proactively deal with the debt before they come knocking, there is a huge range, which Arthur and I will go through, of options that can save the businesses, that can help them. Continuing to ignore the business is just no longer an option at the moment.
Yep, and running from tax debt clearly is no longer an option, is it?
We sort of weren't running even before. But like I said, I sort of feel like there's been a misconception of the difference between a deferral and a disappearance. So the debts haven't gone anywhere. They are still all there, and they're now all due and payable. And by just sort of jumping up and down and saying we were COVID affected is absolutely not enough. Everyone was COVID affected. The ATO assumed that, but there's very much a positive obligation that you need to now proactively engage with the ATO and provide all the information you would have, the same as if you were affected by a bushfire or a flood, as to why you should not pay all your outstanding debts in full now.
So how can a business deal with that debt? I'm going to cover that off next. So Olga, once again, the question is, how do we actually engage and how do we deliver this? And we'll talk about the specifics, and then we move into the customer spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we just, so there are two, I think, very clear things in what we're going to go through today. Engagement is absolutely vital, and how that engagement is and using the right people to engage will change the absolute outcome that you can possibly get. And then also Arthur's going to go through boosting your cash flow, because I really feel both go hand in hand. We need to make sure businesses have the maximum amount of cash available to them so they can continue to be viable and to continue trading. And we also, there is the financial side of the tax debt that has to be dealt with and legal ramifications. But we also see every day there's the stress that takes and the time that the stress takes and the worry. Once this has been sorted out and you have people to help you and effectively hold your hand through this process, it's one thing you don't have to worry about anymore. It's sorted, and then you can get on with running your business. Where I always have a bit of a giggle at this first box. People have obviously heard me talk, and this is a phrase that sometimes that I've actually talked about. So engagement won't necessarily mean just giving the ATO a call and saying, we're getting there, you know, just we need a bit more time, and I'm a really good guy or a really good girl, and all these bad things have happened to me. That is not enough. As I've mentioned, it's no longer enough to just do a bit of a song and dance about COVID. It's more involved with that. There needs to be active engagement. There needs to be a proactive plan. And the ATO have what's called legal practice requirements of what needs to be addressed to both obtain a payment plan, especially if debt hasn't been paid for 2 years, which is often what we're seeing, Or if it was 2019 debt, like I said, the ATO are now treating that as pre-COVID debt. So full applications need to now be provided as to what's going on. It's also not a cookie cutter approach. There is absolutely no one solution that is right for everyone. And it's very much a matter of going through and looking what a client's position is, looking at where they sit within the ATO, what the ATO require, but what the client needs to meet their cash flow. It's no point going, okay, just go and pay half the amount of the tax debt and pay the rest within 6 months. Every single, the clients, that's not what's going to be best for them. And it's about managing that process and potentially reducing the debt in every possible way that we can. So the way that we would go through it, the very first step, which is free, it never costs the client anything, is to go through and evaluate what their specific position is. So we do a very detailed evaluation with the ATO on a client's position. Now, this can include clients have risk ratings. There are certain flags that get raised on clients' files. Now, this can be around how many defaulted plans they've got, nuances around whether plans are defaulted or whether they're withdrawn, what their level of debt is, where they sit within the ATO. There's different areas within the debt area of where they sit within the ATO. Depending on where you sit within the ATO, we know what the ATO are then going to require to get you the best possible plan that's there. We then go through that very tailored report. We work with the accountant, with the broker, and with the client. It's like a hub of advisors to get the client to the right spot that they need to be. And as I said, we don't do any of the compliance. We don't prepare the P&Ls. We don't prepare cash flows. We just deal with the debt side. And that's the same thing when we're talking to the ATO. So we deal with the debt team. We deal with them all day, every day. It's like sort of often our team will sort of joke with them about how their weekend was, and that's how closely the teams work together. And people are human. So when you have that sort of relationship and you know where those applications are going and what is going to be considered, it makes a big difference. After we've gone through and done that review, we then look after it for you. We then take that on board and we negotiate what's going to be the best plan for the client that matches their current cash flow so they can remain viable. And that might be working in conjunction with Arthur and his team to look at where the cash flow is coming, what they need to be viable, what can be afforded in a payment plan. And even if a client has got into a payment plan because they just got flustered and said yes to whatever the ATO wanted them to do, we can renegotiate that plan for lower payments over a longer period of time so they can breathe and get back on track. And I really think that's what clients need at the moment, is that breathing space to be able to get back on their feet, to be able to keep trading. And then the last piece of what we do is looking at the component of interest and penalties. So if you are 1 day late on paying your outstanding tax, there are interest and usually penalties that are applied. At the moment, the interest rate is about 7% compounded daily. So for the brokers that are on this call, often when they compare what you can offer funding at or what the solutions at Earlypay and other people can offer the funding at compared to 7% daily, the ATO suddenly doesn't look, as some people call them, the cheap small business bank that it was once considered. Going back a few years, the ATO interest rate was up to 15% compounded daily. So what we actually do is we don't just look at the current interest and penalties, we go back over the life of the debt. Now, sometimes that can be 8 years. We've gone back as far as 20 years. If clients have had lumpy compliance, so sometimes they can pay, sometimes they don't, there is old historic interest. And what we do is we tailor our applications that are full submissions, normally around 15 pages long, that match the legal practice requirements. So we're trying to make the ATO's job easier and go through what needs to be done, what the ATO need to see in the applications to remit the interest and penalties. even if that interest has already been paid, the application we can do can get old interest back, which if they're in a compliant position now and up to date, can sometimes result in a credit. Other times it results in over half of the debt being reduced, which is huge. It's a huge for the client. And we do that at the beginning. So it is more difficult and it can't happen in every single situation, but where possible, we will absolutely push to get that interest and penalties off at the beginning when we are doing an application for a payment plan. And what that can potentially do is if you reduce the overall debt, obviously you reduce the amount of monthly payments, which makes a big difference to these clients. I have seen a couple of questions pop up as I've been speaking. We might just leave those to the end unless you wanted me to address those now.
I guess have a quick look and we can keep moving on, and then we can address them as part of the next phase up to you, Olga.
I did just see one pop up saying, how do we do this without stepping on the toes of accountants? Which I've just saw it pop up, so I hope I haven't missed the rest of the question, but I will address that. So we're not an accounting firm. We're not a law firm. We just help with the debt component. So we actually work together with accountants. So the accountants do the compliance piece, look after all the compliance and the regulations, and we just come in to deal with the debt side of things. Many times we deal with accountants that don't want to have to do the debt side of things. This is all we do, so it's our absolute specialty. So some people have described it back to me as you go and see a GP for all of your general medical requirements, but then if there is something very specifically wrong with your knee, you would go and see someone about your knee and a specialist. And so that's sort of where we come in. The other thing is, because we are dealing with the debt team, all day, every day, we have relationships with both the directors at the ATO, the assistant directors that are based up in Brisbane, and also the debt team. So it makes a big difference. But we can't help a client in the same way that an accountant would with compliance. So it's like wheeling the specialist in. We clean it all up. We help with the icky bits that you don't want to have to do. And sometimes also as well, accountants are on retainers. So they're being paid a certain amount, and the work that we do does take a lot of work and a lot of time. And so some clients and accountants find it difficult to charge extra, or the clients don't want to pay for the extra work. However, when you're bringing a specialist in, that's a little bit of a different story. I hope that answers the question, but we can come back to it further at the end if you would like.
Absolutely. I think we'll touch a bit more on that. You'll see the example later on, how that all pieces together, and there is that point of difference. So thank you for all that. We touched on this before, and Olga mentioned that through our services we can bolt on and reinforce what needs to be done with the ATO. So with today's topic of being able to fund those promises, those pledges, those payment plans with the ATO, we can often come in, and we're not scared of dealing with this, and we're happy to provide funding so that we can help small to medium enterprises through the flexible finance we provide, through debtor finance. We have a huge approval rating, so we can help people with actual tax debt. We can help all kinds of businesses as well, but more importantly for this here today is we're not afraid of that, and working together with the likes of TaxSure, we're able to then have confidence that is being put aside and set in place, and the business can focus on its business moving forward, having dealt with that problem, which is a serious problem in their business. So we are able to assist through the debtor finance, whether they've got it in their business in terms of equipment. We can do loans that bolt onto the back of that through asset finance and equipment finance. And we're able to provide trade finance, so we can also help them with their creditor side and really get the business focused in on what they can do with relation to moving forward out of COVID, out of the problems that they've faced for the last 2 years, and grow their business after they've also dealt with their ATO position. We can assist with all businesses of all shapes, so as long as it's B2B. They need to have debtors and have a debtors book. So it's not necessarily reliant on their past historical performance. It's more about where they're going with their business. happy with startups as well, with minimal trading history, so we can help with that. Or in instances where businesses need to do a turnaround and restructure or anything like that, we're also comfortable with that position where they may be trading, need to deal with it through a restructure or pre-insolvency, or even through an administration and a docker and come out the other end. We're not afraid of that because there's proper legal processes in place that, if done properly, is somewhere we can help together with Tax Assure so that everyone gets along. And then the business owners, your clients, people who've come to you, can then come out the other side and thrive in their very business. We don't need a lot of equity in their business or personal assets necessarily. They can help, and they can help accelerate that perhaps, but because we focus on the business itself and its debtors, we're able to really help the business stand on its own 2 feet without having those additional security arrangements in place. There are a number of ways that others provide different facilities, and we'll send the slides around later. I think that was another question too, Olga, that somebody raised. We'll send these all around. This is how we compare, and I won't go through all of that, but there's quite a range of products out there, from banks to other non-bank secured lenders, where they cap out very early. But the benefit of our facilities, or facilities like debtor finance, trade finance, is they grow with the success of the business. The more sales you get, the higher your actual limit increases too, so that you can cope with that. And the business plan, together with the structure put in place by Tax Assure, can then ensure that the payments can be made. And that's what we're trying to emphasise here. There are solutions. We've got a package on the financial side. Tax Assure can certainly help on the tax side, and we can complement other arrangements as well. So that's the way we work together. Some of the focus, sale-back finance is something that was very topical because we ran a focus group, and something that people were very interested in is what they can do. A lot of businesses have assets they don't realise the potential in. And what we can do is take those unencumbered assets in those businesses and do a sale and lease agreement where that money can be dragged out of that piece of machinery or that older truck or that older trailer or whatever it may be, and reinvest that as working capital into the business or into the ATO as part of a payment plan. And we're able to quickly use asset finance to inject that massive amount of cash as a lump sum. A lot of businesses have always, they've paid for them throughout history and they've kept them and they keep working on them. So we're able to assist through providing that kind of that finance. Our presentation talks through about our size and scale, so it's typical to what you would be experienced with out there in relation to what asset finance providers provide, so the terms and the amounts and all that kind of thing, quick turnarounds and quick response, and we can deal once again with GST and helping them out of that predicament. But once again, we've got a range of products which are well and truly established in the market, including our debtor finance, and that utilises the value in the actual debtors book, together with our trade finance product to help them pay for their supplies earlier and sooner and unlock that working capital requirement or that supplier chain, which is being tightened up. And those who pay first nowadays, we're noticing, get the goods earlier. They can miss out on supply through those particular supply chains. But what we want to do...
Just interrupt, Arthur, as well. I think it's really important that all the products you're talking about, that you can still offer even if there's tax debt. So even if there is tax debt there, you're still happy to offer these products and work together while we're getting payment arrangements and cash flow sorted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best way to paint this picture is in our live example that we both worked on and we want to present, and that's coming up soon, is that we utilise all the different tools at our disposal, including negotiating that tax debt, including putting the right products in place so that the client can then focus on their business. Far too often people are running businesses absolutely consumed with their cash flow, consumed with having to deal with the ATO and not focusing on their business, which means they can increase sales, they can increase their productivity within their businesses and focus on those critical areas, which will then take care of those other areas. So I think it'll be quite timely now that we move straight into our customer spotlight, where we have a particular manufacturing business where we were put with a problem from an introducer of ours. It was a large business, manufacturing business that actually has the number 2 and sometimes has to fight between someone else to keep that number 2 spot in a particular industry in Australia, albeit that they're only their market share may only be close to about 10 to 12% of the overall market, because there's a Goliath there that they're competing with as well. But putting that to one side, they're a critical supplier into the construction industry, providing a product that is obviously needed throughout Australia. They're full of optimism and drive to succeed. They've had to restructure. They had a plan in place a couple of years ago, like a lot of business owners that people on this call will be familiar with, where they invest in plant and equipment and the technology to enhance the product and also drive more efficient processes that then deliver better results to the bottom line. But that implementation doesn't quite go to plan. It costs more. They have disruptions to that actually coming online, which then in turn disrupts the way the business is functioning during that transition period. This all led, as we know, and we've seen it throughout our journeys, where those businesses invest in those areas for good results, but it takes a heavier toll than expected. And they have undercapitalized or underestimated what it will actually cost to put in place those particular facilities and how much of a disruption it would be to their business. As a result of that, this particular case study ended up running losses, severely impacting on their supply into the marketplace, losing business because they had orders to fulfill, but they couldn't get the product out there. It was affecting their supply lines. It all blew up, and it made it very, very difficult. So this, coupled together with a lot of market pressures, they're in an area where commodity prices fluctuate quite drastically, especially in the last couple of years. And they've had a lot of issues with their production planning and everything else because they can't get the supply in on time so they can properly and efficiently use their products. And as I said to start with, they had invested in a particular processing system that just didn't come online till far later than expected at far more cost than they anticipated, putting a lot of pressure on the business and obviously leading to losses, probably attributable directly and indirectly because of that. So what the business did is they turned to an experienced CFO in the industry that knows this business and knew the industry very, very well. And they came to us to seeking a solution so they can refinance a lot of their working capital solutions and then move forward. So what we were able to do is successfully introduce a Invoice Finance facility for $20 million to assist with their daily working capital and cash flow and make sure that they've got an initial cash flow to assist. There's no ceiling on funding because it's a debtor finance facility. So the more they actually sell, the more productive they get, the more they actually invoice, they're able to utilize that facility to re-inject into their working capital and daily running of the business. We also introduced a sale and leaseback that I mentioned earlier for $5 million, where we took their plant and equipment. We've done the valuation. They had over $10 million worth of plant and equipment, and we're able to put in a $5 million facility against that. So we can, and not all that equipment is new and brand new, but it's still valuable. We can still get an intrinsic value attached to it. We're able to come up with a solution for them where they can pay that off over a period of time, but put that money straight into the business. And a trade finance facilities to allow them to not only pay their suppliers and get that on time, but more importantly, ensure that the delivery of the supplies necessary for their productivity to be maximised is not disrupted like it had been in the last 2 years, so that they can get the goods out the door, continue invoicing strongly, increasing that side of the business and keep the cycle going over and over and over again. However, whilst we were going through that, we had identified there was a significant ATO arrears problem where I think this is where that question about stepping on accountants' toes comes in, where the accountant had done a diligent job with all their financials in terms of their GST reporting, etc., etc. However, had struggled for 6 or 7 weeks and even prior to that to actually come up with a plan that was, first of all, accepted by the ATO, but secondly, that could meet the objectives of the client, who needed to do it in line with their cash flow projections, in line with our facilities that we proposed, and do it in a way that would be successful. And we made it very clear that it was a condition that we wanted that to be put in place prior to us actually proceeding with the full suite of products and be comfortable with the overall position. So during our journey, and as you can imagine, a facility of this size, and we've used a nice big example to sort of highlight how big and grand and efficient we can provide facilities into the market. We engaged Olga through the company to assist, and I'll hand over to Olga to talk you through what was done from there on in. But it was an amazing turnaround from us struggling to get to the position we needed with a payment plan that made sense, that could be achievable, that wouldn't undermine the business and our introduction to funding the business, to being resolved. So I'll hand over to you again, Olga.
Thanks, Arthur. So this is actually a really good example of a number of different things which I'll go through. So as mentioned before, when Arthur first introduced this client, we carried out a very detailed review. So what that initial review told us is, even though the accountant, and the client believed that the debt was around $2.5 million, the true position of the debt was 4.8. The client was bordering within the ATO on going to the next steps of legal. So they were in between departments, and the ATO was about to proceed with legal action. As I mentioned, there was 4.8 million in debt. They were in the middle also of being considered for super penalties. And so there was a super auditor involved in relation to whether or not there should be Part 7A penalties put on, which can be 200% of the debt. The accountant had prepared a very detailed application with beautiful graphs and charts that I couldn't even quite work out how to do on my computer. However, it didn't meet what the ATO needed to see, and that application had been rejected. So because an application has been rejected, you're sort of starting even further behind the 8 ball, because there's already a rejected proposal on file. They're considered to be in a non-compliant position. And we needed initially, obviously, to get some time. So the absolute first thing we had to do was get an undertaking from the ATO that nothing would happen. We were able to get a hold and that undertaking for 2 weeks, which doesn't actually sound like a lot, but that 2 weeks was enough time for us to absolutely get in there, see what was going on. And without that, there would have been, as we mentioned, direct penalty notices and statutory demands, which are the next step in relation to winding up, issued against the company. The other things that the flags showed in relation to this particular company was that the debt had begun in 2019. So even though there was a number of factors that had occurred during the pandemic and during COVID, the ATO classified this as a pre-COVID debt. Therefore, without certain direct engagement, it was considered that this debt of 4.8 million was nearly 2.5 years old. Nothing had been done about it. It was sitting there, and it was a non-COVID debt, non-compliant, and so it was being treated in a completely different way. And so they were the most urgent things, obviously, that we needed to address straight away. We'll just move to the next slide. As I mentioned, so we were able to delay legal action for 2 weeks. What we were also able to do is escalate it from being dealt with in relation to either the legal team or the usual debt team, but we were able to get it to a case officer. When you are dealing with a dedicated case officer, there is a different relationship and different ways the application can be lodged, different ways that the ATO consider it. They also had this particular entity and a lodgement coming up, which was going to increase the debt by another $1 million. What we were able to do is incorporate that future debt into the payment plan. And another thing that we were able to determine from our review was that there was about 500,000, so $500,000 in interest and penalties that on this client's account. Now we get asked, and I just wanted to make it clear because we get asked this all the time, can you get rid of core debt? The answer is no. The only way you can get rid of core debt is by an event of insolvency. And that is something that you need to speak to liquidators and insolvency and restructure practitioners about. But actual core debt, even when you die, I've got a client at the moment that I'm dealing with, the children of a builder. His core debt is not going anywhere. But the interest and penalties, absolutely. And on this one, it was $500,000. We also engaged with the audit officer and were able to put a submission in before he made a decision, resulting in no Part 7 penalties being imposed on the client. Now, they could have been 200% on $1 million. So they agreed to not impose those penalties. And we were able so this required 3 stages of written applications. I mentioned when Arthur and I were chatting through this, when I dot point the solutions down, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound too hard. But the amount of work that actually went into, there were 3 written proposals that answered all of the ATO's legal practice requirements as to why this client effectively should be given the last chance, a second chance, why they needed time, why they hadn't paid the debt, and the period of time for it to match cash flow. The other thing that was really important on this one is that we were doing this work in December. Now, there are so many businesses that December, January, February are a nightmare. No money comes in, you've got wages to pay, invoices don't get paid, and then you've got your February BAS. So that period is just revolting for so many businesses. So what we were able to do is negotiate extreme minimal payments during that period, which match their cash flow to give them breathing space. It's not just about getting clients into a payment plan that's going to tick the ATO's box that I know they're going to default on the first month or in 3 months' time. That's not what we're there for. It's got to match what the client can afford and still be compliant for the ATO. The result in all this is the client has a payment plan that they can realistically afford on predicted cash flow where they're going at the moment. They're in a compliant position. So every month they have payments that they need to make. They don't need to worry about it because they know it's compliant. Once you are in a payment plan as well, you have to pay your ongoing. So all your future lodgements must be lodged and paid in full. If you don't, the payment plan defaults. So they need to be taken into consideration when you are negotiating these payment plans and when you are looking at what can be afforded. If for some reason your clients do actually default or can't pay an ongoing, it's much better to proactively get in contact with us so we can renegotiate those plans than defaulting and the ATO chasing you. And we were also able to get on that one, as I mentioned, we got $500,000 completely off at the beginning. So we didn't wait for the end of the debt. We didn't wait for it all to be paid off. We negotiated that at the beginning. And when you're talking about sort of $4.5 million, I think $500,000 can sometimes get lost. However, every business has an owner behind it. And if you save $500,000 for any business, that's an amazing outcome, no matter how big the business is.
Absolutely. So that was a fantastic outcome and resolution, which has meant that for this particular case study, for this particular business, we were able to delay the legal action, implement the business plan, focus on their sales delivery and growth. They were able to do that. Significant turnaround, still in check, still needs to go down a long path, but they've been given the facilities and the breathing space necessary to be able to achieve that. They can stay on track so they can keep meeting demands and continue to increase sales. And one of the things that is vitally important is often the ATO debt, from our perspective, is not ongoingly checked. So we do compliance and we do all that, you know what finance can be like, but Olga's team also monitor and manage that to ensure they can give us even more confidence that it's been adhered to, because it also reflects on her reputation, but also keeps everyone in check and makes sure that these conditions continue on into the future. So all in all, it's been a fantastic outcome for us and the client in particular, who is now focused on delivering the outcomes that they know they can. That investment is now going to start paying dividends. So after all that hard work and implementation, whatever else, it could have all fallen into a heap, but rather they're able to start realising some of that investment because it's now bedded down, completed, organised, And although it's cost them more than they would have liked and been much more disruptive, they're now in a position where things have been put in place and they can continue on. And it's a good news story. So an absolutely outstanding outcome. And hopefully that describes and paints a picture for everybody on what we talked about earlier on and what we can do with our particular product, but also more importantly, what it actually translates to on the ground for businesses like this. And this can be scaled up and down. It doesn't really matter. The emphasis here is there are ways by talking to specialists in which we can help businesses transition through.
And there was actually a question around that, what the minimum amount is. We've picked a very, very juicy file, obviously, to go through. But at the moment, I'm helping people anywhere between a $60,000 debt and I've got a $9 million debt, and then everything in between. So it's like everything, the amount of work involved will fluctuate, and the costing involved fluctuates depending on the amount of debt and what's been going on behind the scenes. But no, there is no minimum from our perspective of getting us involved. And also, it's never too early. So a question did pop up before about when can we get you involved. An example around that is, one particular example was a mining company. They were about to lodge a BAS. They knew they wouldn't be able to pay that BAS when they lodged it, and they got us involved immediately. So they told us it was going to be lodged. As soon as their accountants had lodged their BAS, we jumped on it, did an application to get them time to pay that BAS. So they never actually went into a position of non-compliance. So the ATO ranks people and looks at how long or whether you've been in positions of non-compliance. You get a risk rating depending on how many times you've been non-compliant, or for how long. So if someone knows that they're not going to be able to pay it in full and we jump on board immediately, you're back into a position of compliance and it doesn't affect either the ATO's internal risk rating. You're not at the risk of then the ATO reporting you to a credit reporting agency, and it affects so many different things if you proactively deal with these debts rather than waiting for that letter or that knock at the door, which makes things so much harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pretty keen to go into questions and answers and whatnot, because we thought, it's always difficult to go into interactive mode online. We wanted to get into this space so that people can sort of ask us more questions that are pertinent to their concerns and topics that they really want us to sort of thrash out. But for me, the emphasis here and today is that we want to highlight that for a couple of years now, everyone's saying the ATO is coming, the ATO is coming, and there's a bit of a myth that that's just a threat and that's not real. And I think something that perhaps, Olga, you can touch on in a bit more detail is that we're starting to see more and more evidence of that coming into play. We are in our business, and I think I'm hearing it across the sphere of other related parties that we deal with, and I can really see that we're going to have to, be on the front foot. I was hoping that part of today, and certainly something I'm doing within our business, is that we're proactive as well, and businesses are proactive. So let's not wait just because we now heard that the ATO is coming and we can and that is going to happen. But let's be proactive. People that we've been saying to be proactive can actually start taking the right steps. And before you answer that too, Olga, I just wanted to highlight we want to send a small little poll. It's only 2 questions, so don't run away quickly now. During the questions and answers, which we'll shortly move into, that will be sent around. If you can kindly respond to that, would be really, really appreciated. But Olga, now over to you.
So we've seen the ATO in the wind-up list last week, which means that they are starting to wind companies up. I'm working on a client at the moment that the ATO has said the next steps are both statutory demands and wind-ups. As I've said, we're seeing statutory demands being sent. Our team's receiving a minimum of 5 calls a day from the ATO, as I mentioned earlier, chasing up unpaid debt, chasing up unpaid lodgements. The Senate Estimate Committee has specifically said that the ATO are back in active debt collection mode. And the case officers that we're talking to in the debt area, their directive is that they are back collecting debt. I think that it's all of those factors speak volumes. And I think also if we have a look at the broader picture, so all of the government supports pretty much have ended. And in a way, the ATO's leniency was a form of government support. So that has ended as well. There's a lot of chatter around about whether or not we're going to see a huge amount of wind-ups and legal action taken by the ATO before or after the election. I think they're absolutely starting the process now. And I think as the year sort of ticks on, we're nearly at April, the election's mid-May, it's almost becoming a moot point. Without getting into politics, I think it will become irrelevant. Whichever party gets in, it won't be that the ATO stop. They're back collecting. They have to collect. The debt is so high and they're almost not doing that businesses a huge favour anymore by the continual deference and the increasing of the debt. So I don't think there is absolutely any question around it that legal action is coming. And the ATO themselves said that they would be initiating legal action by the end of this financial year, and that's coming direct from the directors of debt. So I would hate to say other than another horrid lockdown, which, being from Victoria, I don't really want to mention. I can't see how they wouldn't be commencing legal action.
Very good, thank you for that, Olga. I think Kush is going to quickly send through the poll questions now. We'll move into questions and answers now. I think we can help people unmute, but we've also got the chat open. Either way, we'll have a quick look at any questions that were there we may not have already covered off on. But yeah, please, it's open to the floor. We'd love to hear your questions and hopefully we can elaborate on what we've already discussed.
It's quiet.
It is gone quiet.
Also too, on the last, on that slide, and I believe there'll be something sent out. If you would rather just contact Arthur or I directly on either our mobile numbers direct or email and have a chat about something rather than doing it live or recorded, if there's a specific scenario or an issue that you would like to chat through, absolutely happy. I'm sure I'm speaking for Arthur as well, for you to give us a call or shoot us an email and we can go through any situations too after this.
One of the questions was asked. Sorry, go on.
That you're happy to take direct calls and emails as well.
Absolutely. I also saw that people are asking for a copy of the recording. I'm quite happy to share that. We don't have a problem with that, so we can do that as well. And obviously the presentation, we can send it out to all the participants. Just have a look. Covered off on that. Couple of people are going to contact us, which is fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Here we go. Here's another. Have you engaged with a question has come up. Have you engaged with the ATO about small business restructuring regime? So I'm not an insolvency expert or an insolvency practitioner, which is where the small business restructuring regime comes into place. However, my understanding with that regime is that all the overall debt needs to be $1 million or under, and all superannuation and employee entitlements need to have been paid, and that there are no outstanding employee entitlements. It's also my understanding there's only been about 6 to 10 small business restructures that actually go through, because the majority of businesses that need the help don't either fit either of those criteria. But that's with the caveat that we don't do insolvency, we don't do restructure, we just help with the debt. But I do understand that it's difficult, that not everyone fits within that criteria. And also there's obviously fees involved in relation to going through that process.
Excellent. There's a couple of there's 3 new messages.
Yeah, so just one more. Is there a minimum amount for the ATO to list as a default on creditor reports? That's 100,000. Another one. How do you release any? There was a question that's come up about releasing debt from tax debt. So that comes back to in relation to you can't get core debt written off. However, an application can be made if there's interest and penalties on the account and the relevant criteria are met. A remission application can be made for the interest and the penalties that have accrued on that account to be written off. We would do written applications for those. They're detailed applications, normally around 10 to 12 pages, that answer the ATO specific legal practice requirements on what they need to see as to how or why that debt can be written off.
I think we've got through all the questions there. Does anyone else want to raise anything else? Well, feel free to contact either Olga or myself on anything that we've spoken about today. It's been a delight to talk to everyone here today. I really appreciate your time and joining us. Hopefully you've picked up some points there that you can take away and go off and with your clients and or partners, you know, have a chat, and if you need, explore further what we can do to assist your clients so that they're going to either get the facilities in place and or get their tax obligations in track, because often that breathing space is the difference between life and death. And if we can help in that area, we're obviously very keen to talk to anyone you'd like us to speak to. It's been an interesting journey, and I think now that COVID has become, you know, we know how to live with it, we know how to continue on with business with it, we know how to move forward. We don't know what's ahead, but at least if people are informed on what can be done and how people can be assisted, hopefully we make that little bit of difference.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arthur. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Bye for now.